Welcome, everyone. Give us a couple moments for everyone to file in. Okay, welcome to Niner Knowledge, Sports Analytics in the World of NIL. We appreciate you joining us here today. We have two awesome speakers who are going to present on NIL, revenue sharing, sports analytics, the ever-changing collegiate landscape, and how Charlotte may fare in this day and age. I wanted to give you a couple of notes for housekeeping. There will be a Q&A portion. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function. Zoom may have updated on your screen. If you hit more, you'll see the Q&A button. You can use that at any point to ask questions of our panelists. We'll have Q&A towards the end of the program. You also can use that to ask questions directly to our team. If you're having technical issues or any other questions that you may have, you can use the Q&A to reach out to us. The webinar is being recorded, just so you know. It'll also be available on our website after the event. If you want to watch or if you have to leave early or missed it entirely and you're watching this now, welcome to the recording. Closed captioning is available as well. Again, that more option on the bottom of your screen will let you show captions. And again, reach out to us if you have any questions. With that, I'd like to introduce our Associate Vice Chancellor for Alumni Engagement, Jody Kaplan, who will introduce our speakers.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited about today's session. It is certainly timely, and we all have more questions than answers. So I'm really thrilled that we have two experts with us today to give us more insight. We're joined by two leaders who sit at the intersection of data, college athletics, and the rapidly evolving world of NIL. First, I want to introduce our own John Tobias. John is the Sports Analytics Program Director at UNC Charlotte. John's developed this new program that boasts Charlotte as one of only 5 universities in the country offering bachelor's degrees in sports analytics. Let me say that again. UNC Charlotte is one of only 5 universities in the country to offer this bachelor's degree program. John brings more than a decade of experience as a TV sports statistician with ESPN, covering the last 4 Summer Olympics, multiple World Cups, and hundreds of college and professional games. He's also the founder of Strength in Numbers, a nonprofit dedicated to expanding access to sports analytic education for underrepresented students and strengthening diversity in the industry. We're also joined by Greg Chick. Greg is one of the foremost experts in the NIL landscape. Greg's the founder and editor-in-chief of NILnomics, a national newsletter that breaks down the financial realities of NIL and its impact across college athletics. Greg's work includes deep analysis of NCAA financial reports and the curation of a library of more than 7,500 athletic department documents. In addition to his work in the NIL space, he serves as a data analyst for the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care and is a proud Northeastern University graduate. Together, John and Greg bring a powerful blend of analytics, expertise, industry insight, and real-world experiences. Please join me in welcoming these two experts as they present sports analytics in the world of NIL. Take it away, gentlemen.
Katie, thank you so much, Jody, for the kind words. Definitely do appreciate that. And thank you all for anyone that's, choosing to go ahead and listen to this because, this is something that's a very fluid thing that's going on in real time when it comes to NIL and name, image, and likeness. And we're really going to kind of break it down into 2 parts to where a lot of times people don't understand NIL from a branding standpoint, how students can generate revenue off their name, image, and likeness. And then also how we use the term collectives. That's another term also for like boosters to where, a lot of people pool their money and resources to go ahead and compensate players so they can go ahead and attend their school to go ahead and play, whether it's a revenue sport like football or men's basketball, or even like a non-revenue sport like track and field or like softball. I'm going to really kind of just, touch on the branding part, and then Greg's going to go ahead and talk about the other part to where students are generated and compensated by athletic programs and people outside of that particular entity. But again, just want to just give you a little bit of clarity because prior to 2021, no student athlete, whether it's Division One, Division Two, or Division Three, could generate or be compensated by playing a sport by getting any type of like compensation legally. So I'll emphasize that word legally. But all of that changed in 2021, okay, with the Supreme Court ruling, NCAA versus Alston. Sean Alston actually is the person's name. And I guess the best example I can give you and what I give to my students in my sports business analytics class, let's say prior to 2021, and we'll use a Charlotte student athlete as an example since, we're here at Charlotte. Let's say if there is a Charlotte women's basketball player that became very popular, did really well in terms of being named like first team all conference in the American. Let's say the Home Depot that's over in Concord Mills, if they were having a grand opening and they said, you know what, basketball player, we've heard a lot of great things about you. You're representing the university well. Can you come and sign autographs for our grand opening from 12 to 1? And while you do that, we'll pay you $5,000. Well, prior to 2021, that could not happen. Okay. But at the same time, that same student could also go to Home Depot prior to 2021 during the summer and say, listen, I'm looking for like, some summer work, can you help me out? And they say, yes, we'll put you like in the lawnmower department. We'll pay you $13 an hour. That's how it was. But in 2021, Supreme Court ruling, all of that changed to where students could then generate money off of their name, image, and likeness. And I'm pretty sure that you've seen several examples, whether like Caitlin Clark, who was immensely popular during her time at Iowa, when you would see like in commercials, like with Jake from State Farm, yes, you would see Steph Curry, Patrick Mahomes, but those were like pro players. But now you are seeing college players that are being compensated for that. Now, because of that, you see student athletes that are hiring agents, that help them with their branding, help them like with their contract negotiation part. They're almost treated like professionals, but yet they're quote unquote like student athletes. So what a lot of companies now are trying to do is they're trying to get with student athletes to really like increase like their branding and marketability, whether that's through Instagram or whether that's through TikTok, whether it's like a partnership with like, Sherwin-Williams Paint Company or like Bojangles to once again where students can go ahead and generate money off of their name, image, and likeness and their branding without even being compensated by anyone from like UNC Charlotte or Duke or the student or the school that they more or less like attend. So again, just to break it down, there are two ways that a student athlete can generate money off of their name, image, and likeness, i.e., NIL. One is by branding to where they are being compensated by a third party that has nothing to do with the university. Once again, whether it's, Bojangles or wherever have you, or any other type of company, Nike, Adidas. And then the other way is being compensated from like your actual like athletic department or collective for the most part. So that's really how it is like with the branding. And again, you don't even have to necessarily be like a star athlete to generate money off of your name, image, and likeness. There as long as you have like a really good like personality, or if you end up like really kind of just having like a wow factor in you, you're able to generate money off of that as well by just simply being just the way you are. So again, you don't have to be like an all-star or like an all-conference player just as long as you have like a very like charismatic personality, you can go and generate money off of your name, image, and likeness. And some students have done like very, very well. Student athletes, anywhere from like four figures, five figures, even six figures from that standpoint from a yearly basis. So, and we can go ahead and touch more about that from the branding standpoint. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Greg to where he can go ahead and talk about the other side. And but before I go ahead and turn it over to Greg, is I actually ended up finding out about Greg, months ago because I ended up subscribing to his newsletter, NILnomics, NLnomics, however way you want to pronounce it. And it is chock full with so much information that breaks down everything from a mid-major school like Charlotte or Boise State or App State, how it's impacting them, as well as bigger schools like powerful schools from the SEC, ACC, Big Ten, and Big 12. It is a tremendous resource to go to whenever you want to go ahead and learn more about the NIL and how it's really just affecting so many different people and so many different teams. So as a great segue, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Greg to where he can really break things down from that particular standpoint.
Thank you, John. Can everyone see the slides? Excellent. Great. Thank you so very much, UNC Charlotte, John, Jody, everyone for having me. My name is Greg Chick, as Jody said, editor-in-chief of NIL the newsletter. And what I'm going to do today is just give a basic historical context so that everyone, I don't know the audience if people are familiar, have been tracking this for years. I'm going to give a historical context. I'm going to give a state of the business of college athletics using the almost latest financial data. New financial data just came out last week, actually, so I'm still crunching the numbers on that. But just give you an overview of the state of the business of college athletics. And then I'm going to give you kind of where the road ahead could go. There's so much change in college athletics that you could say it's exciting to track, but it's also challenging to keep your bearings. So I'm just going to begin then. Let's see here. So John alluded to a little bit of this, of what's changing. Again, it was a really watershed moment back in 2021 when the NCAA Alston case happened. Just to give you an idea, it's always reassuring to know that in our divided country of politics, that our Supreme Court, just as recently as 2021, could come together to go against the NCAA. This was a 9-0 ruling against the NCAA that allowed education-related benefits to go towards student athletes. Justice Kavanaugh's got a very famous quote in his sole opinion that he wrote that basically says that the NCAA is the only business that thinks that not paying its employees is its business model. It's often quoted and was such a watershed moment that within months, the NCAA allowed students to be paid off their name, image, and likeness. And from that, more changes happened very quickly. In 2022, the transfer portal opened up. Now, John talked about the changes in student athletes being paid, but really, in my opinion, the biggest change is the transfer portal. Before 2022, if a player wanted to change schools, first, they had to get their coach's permission, which you can imagine often didn't happen. But more importantly, number two is players would have to sit out for a year, which, when you consider how short a college athlete's window of opportunity is, did not happen very, very often. But in 2022, the change allowed student athletes to transfer and immediately play for new schools, which I think has had a drastic change and is a major impact to college athletics. And then just last year, in July, the House versus NCAA case went to the Ninth Circuit and ended in a settlement. I'm going to go over some of the changes there right after this, but there's a watershed moment because one of the big changes is that now institutions would share revenue directly with their players. So really, for decades of generations since the beginning, the idea that the NCAA presented was that if players were compensated, that the whole idea of amateurism would die, that no one would be interested, that college athletics would go away. And starting this past fall, that changed, and players were paid directly from the institutions. And we don't know what the ratings were last night, but it seems that people are still tuning into major college football. So that was a big change. So let me talk quickly about the House settlement. I could probably speak for over an hour of just the House settlement, but just high, from 10,000 feet. The changes that we saw and what happened was basically the NCAA was found to be liable, responsible for not allowing student athletes to profit off their name, image, and likeness as far back as 4 years from when the case was decided. So every day the NCAA should thank the idea of statute of limitations as the reason they still exist, because they would have faced a lot more than the 2.8 billion that they're going to be paying out over the next 10 years retroactively to players that have moved on. So both the NCAA and individual institutions will be paying players that have long graduated because they didn't allow them to profit off the NIL. Another feature of the House settlement was what right now is a $20 million salary cap on college athletics. So this is really important because what happens is this $20 million salary cap is for all sports. So what you can see here is on the right hand side is the distribution, or excuse me, it's each institution's pool revenue, what they call pool revenue, which is their ticket sales, their media rights, their licensing, that type of athletics related revenue added up. And you can see the red line is that $20 million salary cap, which right away you can see there's a lot of inequity, right? You can see on the left hand side, schools in the SEC and the Big Ten, that $20 million is not a rounded error. It's not nothing, but certainly is something you could imagine they can budget for. Whereas all the way to the right in the MAC and the Conference USA, where Charlotte is, that $20 million is more than all of their pool revenue. So you can just see that some schools are going to be challenged to meet that salary cap, and others are going to want it to be raised, which we'll talk about more. Another major change with the House settlement was the change from scholarship limits to roster limits. So previously, schools would have a certain number of scholarships they could distribute to players, but now there's no scholarship limit, but there is a roster limit. And what does that mean? For example, most of the major football programs would be allowed 85 scholarships for the football team and would carry over 100 players, a lot of walk-ons, backups. But now that's been changed to, I believe, just a 100 player roster limit. So in some respect, there's more scholarships for players, but those schools that used to have over 100 players are going to have to go without all those walk-ons. The next part about the House settlement is the establishment of the College Sports Commission, which I'm going to give a little bit more information on. Basically, the NCAA does not want to be in the business of investigating, sanctioning, or doing anything when it comes to money with schools. I think they've learned their lesson, that they've done such a poor job of it, that they wanted to offshore that responsibility to a new entity, and that's the College Sports Commission. So thinking about what John said, the example of a UNC Charlotte, a basketball player, if the local Home Depot wants to sponsor them to come sign autographs, any type of deal like that that's over $600 has to be approved by this new entity. They have this app that they call NIL Go that players have to register with and submit documentation. And the basic idea of this from a high level is that schools and really the College Sports Commission want to stop boosters from paying players for their athletic performance. And they want these deals to be for a legitimate, quote unquote, legitimate business purpose. Now, if your brain is thinking, well, wait a minute, what's stopping any business, Home Depot or the local coffee shop, from paying these players whatever they want? Who is the College Sports Commission to say what entity can pay a player? If you're thinking that, you're thinking like everyone else, the absurdity of this system that they've developed. So what you're seeing on the right-hand side is a report that was released from the College Sports Commission just 2 weeks ago of how many deals have been approved. You can see that in the green. They've approved over 17,000 deals worth over $120 million. But there's some pesky deals on the right-hand side. You see over 500 worth $14 million that for some reason or another, they're not approving. I'm sure there are some athletes that are being paid exorbitantly that may not meet the barrier of a fair market deal. But I think there's going to be some litigation in the future for the College Sports Commission to deal with, because you don't see this in the pros. No one asks Patrick Mahomes if Nike is paying him his fair market rate. There's no official organization to do that. So it's a bit absurd that this is what college sports has. But for now, this is the system that's been set up. The next thing I want to go over quickly is, if anyone thinks that college sports is still amateur, I want to go over just how big a business it is. So I'm going to go over first how much revenue these institutions are bringing in. The numbers you're seeing here are from the latest fiscal reports that the schools have filed for fiscal year 2024. How are these schools making their money? And the basics of it is media rights. Media rights is driving how these schools make money. It's over $5.9 billion across the whole enterprise. So that's the big source of it. But you can also see it. College athletics is unique in that alumni booster donations, internal, from the institution itself is subsidized in many of these athletic departments. Student fees is a big part for some schools. You don't see that in the pros. So there's a lot of money being made. Ticket sales is pretty big, and sponsorship is very big. But this graphic should give you a high level view of where schools are getting their revenue. I also just want to visualize this in a different way. What you're seeing in this graphic is when you add up all those revenues and you put a distribution of institutions, you can see there are 13 institutions that make over $200 million a year in annual revenue. And I made a point to highlight where Charlotte is. You can see they're in that little bubble on the left-hand side. I believe they are generating over $50 million a year. But I hate to, if you're not aware, I hate to report that UNC Charlotte is one of those schools that is running on a deficit, like many others. You can see the orange dots here represent schools that operate on a deficit. So that's something to keep in mind, that many of these programs are not breaking even. You could certainly analyze the reports, as I have, even further, to take out those institutional subsidies, those donor funds, to see just how much these schools are operating at a loss from a business perspective. Then let's take a look at the expenses that these programs have. Now, before all of this change, starting with the Alston case, the general idea was all these schools that had all this revenue would differentiate themselves from each other by lavishing funds towards coaches and facilities. We've all seen the stadiums, the training facilities, the offices, just how much they seem like palaces at some of these top schools: Oregon, Ohio State, Texas. The idea would be, if you have all that revenue and you can't pay your players, the way you would divert those funds, because of course you have to spend what you have, is to build up expensive facilities. So that's why 22% of all expenses in Division I football has gone to infrastructure. And then right behind that is coaches' pay. At the highest level, these coaches are getting paid very handsomely. We all saw the Lane Kiffin drama play out this past month or two. Coaches are well compensated. I think one of the ideas going into the House settlement was that there would be a rebalancing of how all this revenue is distributed between the players and the coaches, and we all thought that there would be a mass change, and it just doesn't seem to be the case yet. That could change, obviously, but for the time being, despite how much college sports professionalizes, the top coaches are out earning the top players by a pretty wide margin. Next, you'll see I did kind of the similar chart of expenses, and it's just the same pattern. There are just only 12 schools that have expenses over $200 million. If you look in the archive of my newsletter, you'll see I've kind of explored in other issues, the amount of staff that some of these schools will hire, how much they have to spend towards travel. Conference realignment has had a real impact on that. But this chart really does show that there is a close relationship between revenue expenses. This graph right here kind of does it better, probably, because you're seeing their expenses and their revenue all in one chart. Excuse me. And I did highlight UNC Charlotte. I hate to say again that they're on the wrong side of that line. Anyone who's to the right or underneath that line is running a deficit. So unfortunately, UNC again is running at a deficit. But this chart does a really good job of kind of showing at least the financial hierarchy. I probably, in light of yesterday, I should have put Indiana, highlighted them. I think they are certainly at the higher end. But you can see where UNC Charlotte is. Now, John spoke a little bit about collectives, boosters, paying third-party NIL. And one of the major organizations that has the data behind all of this is a company called Open Doors is basically a platform for athletes to register and market themselves and find the brands that are paying them. A lot of this data is private. Caitlin Clark doesn't have to disclose how much she makes from a State Farm commercial, but a lot of the other kind of smaller deals are all being brokered by the Open Doors platform, which makes anytime they release a public report, which they do pretty regularly, makes them the preeminent source for data. So what you see here is taken from them. They are the only people who have this data. I get asked all the time, how much is the star quarterback at this school or the point guard at that school? How much are they making? And so far, none of that is public. A lot of state legislators are pushing to make sure that their schools will not have to release that data to public records requests. So until we start getting that data from schools, Open Doors is the #1 source for this type of data. And you can see at the Power 4, Group of 6, Division 1 levels, how schools are splitting up the funds that they have. It mirrors a lot of the calculations that were made in the House settlement. During that process, sports economist Daniel Rasher used, I believe, a 75% breakdown or projection for football, I think 15% for men's basketball, 5% for women's basketball, and 5% for everyone else. And the numbers don't match exactly. You're seeing in real time here how schools are choosing to distribute those funds. You can even see it by position, which is obviously quite interesting. But this is the best data if you're curious, how schools are paying their players, which players and which positions. This is the best data on the market right now. Again, I think John did a great job kind of reviewing what NIL is, name, image, and likeness. Are those commercials, those autograph opportunities, sponsorships? You can make, without getting into the history too much, you can make a good argument that college football video games is the source of all this turmoil, all this change. And you can see that the new one that came out last year just did good business because there had been such an absence of college sports in the video game space. But you can see Arch Manning and Olivia Dunn, which what's interesting about them is I don't think anyone 4 or 5 years ago would have guessed a gymnast from LSU would be one of the top earning NIL student athletes. But, I think the data show that she and a lot of other female players, I think traditionally we're seeing the female student athletes out earn third-party NIL deals than their male counterparts. So that's always an interesting wrinkle. Another interesting data point that Open Doors released is just the growth in NIL. You can see here, this is a longitudinal review of the data where, again, what sticks out to me is those blue bars that you don't see at the start. That's because the House settlement just hit. So those blue bars are the schools directly compensating players, whereas before, that money was done from collectives. And John spoke about that. Collectives were kind of an organization of alumni boosters at each institution that would pool their money and pay players. And that was a big source of NIL and student athlete revenue and payment for quite a while. But you can see starting this year, it's become less and less a part because these boosters, collectives are shutting down and they're starting to just fund their athletic departments. But you can also see that these green bars, those which represent those third-party deals that student athletes are having, and they have and they will continue to be a major part of this market. So that's a basic overview. Again, there's so much to talk about here for what time we have. I'll just say what's next. The most undefeated person in all of college athletics is always the lawyers. They've done well for themselves in the college athletic space, and there's plenty more for them to do. Title IX issues have been unaddressed. Can schools share their revenue with athletes at the rate they are? given the fact that it's not equal between the men and female student athletes, that's undecided and will be tested in court. Again, the NIL Go College Sports Commission system of monitoring third party deals will certainly be tested. A big news piece coming out of the NCAA convention that was last week and the college national championship last night is the idea that the salary cap should exist. I mean, I think schools you saw in that chart, some schools can certainly afford more than $20 million. And I think there's a big push to get rid of the salary cap. So we'll see more about that. The transfer portal, I mean, there's just too many noteworthy cases of players signing deals with the school they're at, and then literally the next day or two changing their minds and trying to transfer. Can those contracts be enforced? Those will all be tested in court. You hear a lot from athletic departments, from the NCAA, that the savior to this entire system will be the Congress. There's been a big push for federal legislation to fix this, and I think everyone thought that it would go through Congress into the White House quickly, and that has not been the case. Me personally, I don't think that will ever be the case. The next thing is private equity. We could talk a lot about how private equity is circling college athletics and looking for a piece of the pie. Again, conference realignment, a super league. There's always a thought that there's going to be a super league formed by the top schools, and everyone's just jockeying for position to get into that super league when it happens. And then, of course, this has all happened amidst a reemergence of legalized sports betting and gambling, which will cause its own issues. So, that's my brief presentation. Again, my contact information is on the right-hand side, link to the newsletter. But John, do you want to speak a little bit, give some glaze to your sports analytics program?
Yes, 100%. Well, a couple of things really, really quick before I segue to the sports analytics program. One thing I want to convey to everyone is that Greg had posted up a picture of a young lady by the name of Libby Dunn. So just to provide clarity and context, Libby Dunn used to be a gymnast. Thank you. For LSU. She was a good gymnast, but good enough to the point to where she made the Olympic team in 2024 or 2021 in Tokyo. No, but that is a perfect example to where you can have someone in college that has the same line of work as a professional, but they will make more money in college doing the same thing as a professional. That's just like an accountant that's getting paid more as a junior in college than like an accountant working for one of the firms. So case in point, Suni Lee, she's not as well known as Simone Biles, but she's a pro gymnast. She was in the 2024 Olympics. Her like earnings yearly is around like $2 to $3 million. Libby Dunn, while at LSU, averaged over $3 million. Okay, another great example, a gentleman, a quarterback by the name of Brendan Sorsby. So Brendan Sorsby played quarterback at Cincinnati, which is a Big 12 school. He just transferred to Texas Tech. Texas Tech signed him to a contract, a 1 year contract for $5 million. Okay, but to put that in perspective, that is more money than the Cleveland Browns starting quarterback, Shador Sanders, for his entire contract. When he got drafted in the fifth round by the Cleveland Browns, he signed a 4 year contract for $4.6 million. So we're talking about a college quarterback that plays the same exact position for one of the 32 NFL quarterbacks that's making more money in 1 year than a person that signed a 4 year contract. But this is more or less like the world that we're in when it comes to NIL. And then one last thing I want to say is that I would think, okay, so how does this impact mid-major schools? Because Charlotte is a mid-major school. It's part of a group of five. You have the American, you have Conference USA, you have the Mountain West, you have the MAC, and you have the Sun Belt, and then you have like your Power Four schools. So that's the Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC, and the SEC. So to put that in perspective, James Madison is a mid-major. So James Madison, along with Tulane, they were one of two mid-major schools that got invited to the college football playoff. They got a lot of money, and thank goodness for them, good for them by being invited. But guess what happened? As soon as their season ended, all 11 of their starters on offense went to the transfer portal. And that is because you have bigger schools that can go ahead and pay these players, whether they're center, guard, wide receiver, any skill position player, more money than a mid-major. Now you may say, well, how does this impact a mid-major like Charlotte? Well, it does, but it doesn't mean that we can still not be successful because you have like examples like Tulane and James Madison, that's done well. It's just really just more than just recalibrating and just reloading to make sure that you're still competitive each year. The one thing I will say about the sports analytics program that we have here at Charlotte, again, just like Jody eloquently mentioned, we're just the fifth school in the country where you can get a bachelor's degree in sports analytics. It's a program that I'm very excited about. It's not just me that's part of like the program. We have Abby Thomas, who's also a co-director of the sports analytics program. We have Michael Shuckers, who's also a professor of sports analytics, and we really are doing like a lot of good work, like partnering with a lot of pro teams, whether it's Premier League teams, NFL teams, NHL teams, NBA teams. So if you want more information, I'm going to go ahead and put in a link with sportsanalytics.charlotte.edu to where you can go ahead and learn more. But after that, I believe Josh, should I turn it over to you to open up any questions that anybody may have for either Greg or myself?
Yeah, we have a lot of great questions coming in, so I'm going to try to some of them are along similar topic lines and asking similar things. So I'm going to try to pull all these together. Um, so kind of a couple questions from Todd. Is this the same thing as pay for play? Are players paid based on stats? And also now that booster money can go to athletic foundations, money can now go to athletic foundations and that money goes to the player and no separate collectives are needed. Is that kind of how this works now?
Greg, you want to take that?
Sure. Well, it's still a little bit of a wink nod type of situation. Schools are officially, legally only paying players for their name, image, and likeness. The idea of them paying for their performance and for what they do on the field is a big no-no. It just so happens it's a coincidence that some of these top players are getting paid well for the NIL. And you see that in these transfer controversies. Washington's quarterback signed a $4 million deal with Washington. 2 days later, tried to sign with who was it? I think it was Ohio State or some other school.
LSU.
That's right, LSU. And he would have been able to, right? Like there's no rules that says a player can't transfer and play for another team. That's how the system works now. But his NIL, would not have been able to been used by LSU unless LSU paid a buyout to Washington. So is it actually being paid? Is it actual pay for play? In practical terms, yes, but the lawyers will tell you otherwise.
Thank you. Karen is asking, how would private equity play a role in college athletics?
Jonah, I can take this. I think we are still in the infancy stage of how that's going to play out. Now, the University of Utah broke the seal a few weeks ago as the first individual institution to accept private equity funds. And then the Big 12 followed suit pretty closely after that as the first conference. And from a high level, what we're looking at is that either the institution or the conference is going to establish a for-profit LLC subsidiary of the institution or the conference. They're going to bundle their media rights, their ticket sales, their licensing in that entity, and they're going to sell a stake in it to these private equity companies. And then, from the institution and conference perspective, they get two things. They get the money, of course, the infusion of capital to do all the things that they think will drive further revenue growth. But also they'll tell you, and I think it's reasonable to agree to this, is that they get the expertise. These private equity firms, I think the one with Utah was Redbird Capital, which is a big investor in sports. So they work with a lot of pro teams and know how to drive revenue from a sport perspective. So these schools will get the revenue, the capital to grow and to stay competitive with the top institutions, but also we'll get that expertise to know how to drive revenue in their business. Hope that answers that question.
Thank you. Jerry and Chris have similar questions. Chris says, I'm a high school basketball coach at a public school with NIL now legal for public school athletes in North Carolina. Any advice on how to prepare what the future holds at the high school level? And Jerry's a similar, I know we talked a lot about college, but is there a report that also shows how early what age players are starting to get NIL deals.
The one thing
John,
I would probably suggest, I'm sorry, Greg, the one thing I would probably suggest, there's always ways to like circumvent the system like legally. So if you don't have the means to pay a player, I would make sure that I would see that you could somehow get them connected, whether it's like, restaurants or like local stores to find some type of ways to where they can go ahead and generate revenue that way. Because a lot of times you have some states that are even putting like the clamps down to where high school students cannot generate money off of name, image, and likeness. Perfect example is Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers was a high school player, quarterback in Texas. A lot of people don't know this, but he ended up going to Ohio State before he went to Texas. And the reason why is because he could go ahead and generate NIL money in Ohio, but not in the state of Texas. But once when everything was lifted, and not just that, but once when he became a college student, when he left Ohio State and went back to Texas. So that would probably be the best advice that I can give. But again, just like Greg had mentioned, we're really like in the infinite stages, like when it comes to this, like, yes, everything like, passed in 2021, but I think that this is like constantly like evolving. And I think we're going to have, if we have this same, webinar, like this time, 2027, January 20th, there are going to probably be a lot of things that have changed just in a 365-day period for sure. But I would just say be as creative as you can and try to partner, have some shared partnerships with local companies that's in the Charlotte metro area.
yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. If there are good, perhaps not great players who want to participate in college sports for little or no money, why should academic institutions pay college athletes?
uh, because they want to win. You know, athletics is a good reflection of higher education broadly, and both of them are concerned with prestige. You hear about what they call the Flutie effect, right? That achieving the top level of success in college athletics can have downstream effects on the business of the overall institution. You're going to hear a lot this week about how many out of state applicants have applied to the University of Indiana in the last year or two, and how much their performance has driven increases there. So the reason they don't just take players or take students that are walking around campus and put a helmet on them is because they want to win. They want to drive that growth, and the idea that college athletics is the front porch of the institution has always been the motivator behind a lot of what is college athletics.
I just want to add to that real quick, Greg. This is something I talk about in my sports business analytics class. But prior to Nick Saban becoming the head football coach at the University of Alabama, the University of Alabama admissions department would receive like a pretty solid amount of like applicants. Okay. But once when Nick Saban not only became the head football coach at Alabama, but then started winning like 6 and 7 national championships, the admissions part in terms of the application rate soared, soared, like it tripled. And not just that, but it ended up giving the University of Alabama admissions department flexibility to where a lot of those applicants ended up being like out of state. So that means that University of Alabama, they ended up having the luxury of getting out of state students to where that's more revenue because of out of state tuition. Same with UConn when UConn's women's basketball team started to elevate and winning national championships. Colorado, when Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, took over, they had more minority applicants last year than they have ever, and more applicants, period. So is that all of a sudden because they ended up like having like a new psychology department? No, it's because people gravitate towards winners. And what Greg said is 100% correct. And it may be kind of hard to connect the dots when it comes to like winning, but there is something that is true to that, to where if you have a program, especially like a high end, like a well-known like sport, like basketball, football, does not mean that baseball, softball, volleyball aren't important. They are very important, but those are the ones that get like the TV deals more so than any other sport. And if you do well in those two sports, it will have an impact on your admission. So it's really like a domino effect in a positive way.
Thank you. We had some questions about some eligibility. What is going to happen when, let's say, Trinidad Chambliss, the quarterback for Ole Miss, goes to court and asks for a 6 year and potentially wins? Where do we see eligibility ending? And I think John, maybe you mentioned earlier, that it's maybe more profitable to stay in college for some athletes than to go pro.
Yes, no, because you would think by theory, like, wait a minute, like, wouldn't you want to just go ahead and just be done with college and go to like the NFL? But I don't think that the last I checked, I don't think that Trinidad Chambliss is projected to be a first round pick. And there's 7 rounds in the NFL, and if the higher you're drafted, the more money you're going to get. But just like the example that I gave you with Brendan Sorsby with Texas Tech. He's getting paid $5 million, and that's more than Shadur Sanders' 4-year contract altogether. So, from a monetary standpoint, it is more advantageous for him to go ahead and return to school. And I believe that Trinidad Chambliss is 24 years old. So that's something that's like unheard of, like, back in the day, but this is really like the new normal. So that's really the reason why he's fighting for like a 6 year of eligibility.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think the eligibility thing, the NCAA is fighting these cases so hard and have had some minor successes because they know it's arbitrary. There's no reason, anyone could walk off the street at any age and go to college. And then why can't they play, high level college athletics? The thing is, it's an antitrust to allow institutions to collude against labor and allow labor to participate in a market. There's been no collective bargaining with labor. There's been no negotiations, no understanding. It's just been top down, and that's why the NCAA in the major cases, from Alston to House, has lost all these major antitrust cases because they refuse to acknowledge that the labor has a seat at the table. And until they do that, anytime they try to make a rule about eligibility, about payment, it's going to get challenged in court. So that's why the eligibility thing is certainly a prominent issue in college athletics.
Uh, Another question from Karen. Do we think that the mid-major schools might form their own group so they can compete against other schools with similar budgets?
What do you think, John?
That's what a lot of people are talking about, for the most part, because when the college football playoff, was when the teams were announced, and like, well, where's Notre Dame? And like, what do you mean to tell me that Tulane and James Madison's in it, and instead of like a blue blood name like Notre Dame, like a lot of people like they were really like complaining about that. But I do think that it's somewhat like a valid point. I do think that there is a market for mid-major for sure, but I do think that it's now becoming more of the have and the have-nots because it's hard for mid-majors to go ahead and keep their good players. The perfect example, again, we're here at Charlotte. Let's go ahead and talk about, like, let's say football. For the last 3 years, the Charlotte player that ended up leading the team in rushing yards and receiving yards, whether it's 23, 23, 2024, 2025, the following year, they went to the portal. Okay. Men's basketball, top three scores in 2024 and 2023, they all left like the following year. But at the same time, you still have mid-major schools like, VCU and like other schools that can still be like very, very formidable. You just really have to be crafty with the way that you're going ahead and like recruiting players. So again, it's a very fluid conversation that I think that mid-major athletic directors are having like on a regular basis. So I'm eager to see how everything is going to turn out.
As a piggyback to that, how do you think NIL or these new rev sharing rules will affect even smaller schools like D2, D3, NAIA? Geez, a mouthful there.
Well, it's to me again, it's like a domino effect to where you have like, Power Four to where they can pay the most money. Then you have like the group of five to where you can still get paid. Then you get down to like Division 2 to where a lot of those players aren't paid. And then you get down to more or less like D3, NAIA, JUCO to where they're not getting any money at all. So just like how the Power Four schools, I don't want to use the term rating, but they are poaching like some of the best players from like, the mid majors like Charlotte. Well, what will happen and what is happening is that these group of five schools are getting like the best D2 players and NAIA players and JUCO players. So it is truly like a domino effect. But again, you can still get quality players and still do well, but it's just more work when it comes to like, recruiters and scouts, and it's constant turnover. constant turnover.
We have two similar questions from Christopher and Nick, both around agents. Where is the agent market coming from? Is that professional agents servicing the college needs or financial planners or something similar? And do you think, generally speaking, the impact of sports agents in college football has a good or bad impact?
John?
I don't think it's a good impact. I don't because, and the reason why I say that is because I think that a lot of agents that are circling to try to go ahead and make inroads to these student athletes, I don't think that they have like their best interests. And I think that a lot of times you have players that really get bad advice, whether they say, leave college and go ahead and go pro. Yes, but I only average like 10 points a game. Yes, but with your height, you're projected, we're hearing from a couple of teams. And then like once when you go ahead and like enter the draft and you sign an agent, you can't come back. And also the same thing is that the last time I checked, and Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there were like close to 8,000. I didn't say 80, I didn't say 800, 8,000 players that ended up entering the transfer portal in football. Now, you would think in theory that all 8,000 of those players were able to get to another team. No, it's literally like musical chairs to where like it's also been happening to where a lot of players enter the portal because they've been given bad advice because they either A, feel that they can get to a bigger program or B, another program that will pay them more money. And once they're not able to find it, they try to go back to their old school and say, hey, is there a spot still available for me? And there's not a lot of the times. So again, yes, it's the onus is on the student athlete, but you still have to make sure that you surround yourself with really good people that have like your best interests. And I just think a lot of these agents, especially they're getting a commission, they don't have like they don't get like the best advice, in my opinion, from what I've observed.
Yeah, I would just emphasize that there's no national centralized kind of authentication system like all the other pro leagues. You have to register with the league. You have to go through some certification process. There's a screening, whatever you think of agents in the pros, you can at least rely on some level of certification to kind of weed out the worst actors. Whereas you hear it's been interesting the last few weeks. Some of the major college football coaches are saying they're talking to parents and uncles and roommates of these players. It's just truly the Wild West, which adds to the argument that the NCAA pushes for federal legislation because that would probably be one of the rungs of any legislation is some type of agent certification system.
Weston asks, with Duke football winning their first conference championship since 1961 and Indiana winning the national championship last night, do you see the tide shifting from traditional athletic programs building success over decades to a more Dodger style buy championships model if the school can afford it?
That's a great question. Um, I don't know. It depends on how you think those schools got to where they got. Did Indiana get there because Mark Cuban wrote a big check that was bigger than all the other schools, or is Kurt Signetti the difference maker? How you answer that question probably drives how you interpret this what's happening. I think at the highest level, the coach still matters. You do need to have the resources to be able to compete, but I just think that the salary cap is creating all these interesting wrinkles. If you remember, I said that the 20 million salary cap is for all sports. So what happens if you're in the Big East? You don't have football. What does that give you a strategic advantage? Because now you can spend $20 million on your basketball program, whereas the Kentuckies, the Dukes, they have to split that salary cap among all the different sports. I was talking to someone last week who said, they go to a school that's D3 in every sport except hockey. In hockey, they're D1. Well, that school can spend $20 million on their hockey program. I don't know how Colorado and all the other prominent programs can compete against that because they have to fund their football and basketball programs. So the salary cap has created some really interesting wrinkles. And in this new era, I still think resources matter, but the coaches they make a big difference.
Yeah, I want to add to that, like Tim Pernetti, who's the commissioner for the American Athletic Conference, who's also like where Charlotte is. is that he had pretty much had a mandate a little over a year ago to where each school in the American, including Charlotte, they needed to go ahead and generate number one, $20 million, and then two, make sure that it is distributed to like, the sports. And Charlotte has 19 team sports. But it's really one of those things to where if you have $20 million, number one, that would be great if we could raise that much. But two, how are you going to distribute that? Are you going to distribute all to football? Are you going to give a third to like women's basketball, women's soccer, your Title IX sports? Like, let's say, for example, like if you have a third string football player as opposed to someone who's an all conference, like women's soccer player, you have a non-revenue sport versus a revenue sport, but it's a third string quarterback. Who do you give like the money to? And this is something, a discussion that ADs are talking about every day. So this is like in real time. But again, just like Greg had mentioned, it's the Wild Wild West. It's not regulated very well at this moment, but we're just hoping that if more regulations are like put in, it would be like a lot more structured for the most part.
I think it's time for two quick questions. I appreciate everybody. There's a ton of questions. We didn't get to answer all of them. I appreciate you submitting them. We'll share the questions with Greg and John, and if there's any specific follow-up that we have, we can follow up. A quick follow-up on the private equity conversation. With so many teams not making money, how will that pay out? Or are these private equity firms only interested in profitable schools?
Hmm. I think they're interested in all schools because they see how much money is being driven by these teams. But I think what you're going to see is a rapid transformation of how these schools operate. They're not operating as businesses. You can see that in the changes in stadiums. You're seeing stadiums, instead of increase in size, they're decreasing in size and creating more premium luxury suites for high ticket fans. You're seeing additional licensing deals. So, before, 5 years ago, it would have been unheard of to think that you can put your logo on a field, but that has already happened. It was supposed to be the case last week that jersey patches were going to be approved. Everyone expects that to happen in the next week or two or the next few weeks. So there's going to be a lot of new revenue opportunities in college athletics, and then there's going to be a real sharp eye look towards expenses. I think the staff sizes, these facilities, the coaches, there just has to be a change in order to make these teams run as businesses. And I think that's the mindset of the private equity firms that are going to drive overall profit for these schools.
One last question. Do you think there's any talk of syncing up the date that the college portals open with the date or the general schedule of the NFL?
Oh, that's a good wrinkle. John, what do you think?
That is a really good question. My honest answer is I don't know. You would think that something like that would make sense, but something has to be done with the portal because now you have it to where at least student athletes, and I'll make it super quick, they actually have it better than some people could say than pro athletes because with pro athletes, yes, they make a lot of money, but you are like signed to like a multi-year contract. So like if you sign like a contract with a lot of money, at least you are like committed to that team for the most part for like 4 years or so. You're a free agent every single year if you are like a student athlete. Like you can go ahead and renegotiate every single year. Like when John Calipari from Arkansas, prior to that Kentucky, prior to that from UMass, is that he stated to where students now are going to four different colleges in 4 years because they're trying to do whatever they can to make the most money. And again, they don't see the foresight to where, well, how does this impact me from like getting a college degree? I agree with Cal to where I think that it needs to be regulated to where there could be a schedule, like you had mentioned, that's more NFL to where it's a lot more structured. The operative word is structure. If we find something to where it's a lot more structured and there's more rules to where it's more regulated, I think that this will make things to where it's a lot less chaotic than what it is right now. But whether you're a mid-major like Charlotte or like a powerful like Carolina, you're still like dealing with like the same issues. It's just different issues.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, Greg, John. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate your time and energy today. I think you had a lot of great information for our attendees. If you are attending, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here today. I thank you for submitting these questions. The recording will be available within the week on our website if you missed anything or want to catch up.
Sí, o sea,